Pope Francis leaves behind a legacy in Canada underlined by his long-awaited apology for residential schools, over half of which in this country were run by the Catholic Church. Perry Bellegarde, the former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, was very involved in all that it took for the Pope to issue an apology on Canadian soil. Chief Bellegarde joins me now. I appreciate you taking the time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Chief Bellegarde, as you reflect on your role and really all that it took to get the Pope to come to Canada to deliver that apology, how are you remembering Pope Francis today?
Well, for me, it's a day of mourning. It's a day of prayer and a day of reflection, for the impact that this man had on not only the Catholic Church, but the world. And for us as First Nations people here in Canada, we lift him up because he did come to Canada and made that apology at Muskwachees in 2022. And we think back to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when they came out with their report in 2015. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, number 58, was to try to get the Pope to come to Canada to make the apology directly to survivors of the residential school system. And he didn't have to do that, but he did. And it took a lot of work with a team to advocate to get him to come here, building relationships with the papal nuncio in Ottawa, Luigi Bonazzi, building relationships with the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops, and Monsignor Leo was a key contact, and just standing on the work of former leaders like Chief Fontaine and Maggie Hodson and all the TRC commissioners. It was very important for him to come here, and that happened.
I remember at the time covering the Pope's visit to Canada that it was met kind of with a mixed response of hope, a little bit of disappointment, and calls for action. How do you think, Pope Francis's time as pontiff is being remembered in Indigenous communities?
I think the majority will acknowledge and lift him up for what he's done. Again, he did not have to come here, but he did. And he did apologize for the abuses. He did apologize for the language and cultural destruction. He apologized for the hurt and the pain and the suffering of children via the residential school system and the role that the Catholic Church had in implementing that system here in Canada. It's been called a genocide of our people. And so he acknowledged all of that. And even under his leadership, the Vatican went on to even repudiate the doctrine of discovery as an illegal racist doctrine. And of course, that was a way for the church and governments and nation states to take control of our Indigenous people's land and territories. So he's done a lot in that regard. And it was important for him to come here to apologize, because how can you heal? How can you move on and forgive from all those years of suffering and pain that the survivors went through without hearing that? And so I think the majority of people will lift him up and acknowledge him for that, because that's part of the healing journey.
As you've just laid out there, his approach to the papacy really kind of ushered in a new era of Indigenous relations, despite really resistance within the Catholic Church. Do you anticipate that whoever fills the role next will continue Francis's efforts towards reconciliation?
Well, we hope that reconciliation will be embraced. There's still a lot of work to do going forward. There's still records that have to be released. There's still sacred artifacts like our sacred pipes, our sacred bundles that the Vatican has in their possession that can be returned. There's helping advocate to close the socioeconomic gap that still exists in Canada, in terms of Indigenous peoples versus the rest of Canadians, in terms of better housing, better access to clean drinking water, better healthcare, better education systems. So there's still a lot of work that can be done just to embrace the relationship between the church and Indigenous peoples here at home, here in Canada.
Do you have worries about who may fill the role next?
I don't have any worries. I think, Pope Francis has laid some very important tracks and groundwork here. And I think the next Pope will just continue to build on that good work, continue to build on the bridges that have been made between First Nations people and the church. It's something that we have to look forward to. We know there's a past, and that past has not always been good in terms of our relationship with the churches and/or the crown in a lot of respects, but we have to move forward. And I think that's what we have to start looking at now, and working with not only the Pope, but other world leaders We have a prime minister that's going to be elected here in Canada. We have to continue to work with them. We have to work with the premiers. We've got to work with everybody. I used to always make the point that nobody's going anywhere here in Canada. So let's move forward with honor and love and respect and peaceful coexistence and mutually benefiting from sharing the land and resource wealth that's here. And so we've got to work with everybody. And I think, again, when you think about Pope Francis and his legacy, majority of our people will hold him up. We'll hold him high in high regard for what he's done to lay that clear path on reconciliation.
Okay, Perry Bellegarde, I have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your reflections this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.